Et ça fait longtemps que tu fais ça?
Un an?
Ah, c'est tout?
Ouais. Mais par contre, j'apprends vite, hein. Faut pas se dire, y a pas de. Oui.
And we are back. Everybody, thank you for joining us on Play It Forward. We're back with Oriana Ng. She is filmmaker, writer, director. We're going to be talking about Waltz for Three. Oriana Ng, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Kostya.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. And I should say you are the lovely and the talented Oriana Ng. Before we go into diving about the film, and I'm not trying to flatter you because I do think the film is executed with talent. And it's been lovely talking to you pre-game, so I know you're lovely. So those are true sentiments. Um, Oriana, can you set up the film Waltz for Three for us? And before you do that, introduce yourself, please.
Yes, so my name is Oriana Ng. I'm talking to you from New York City, but I'm originally half French, half Singaporean. I grew up in France in a small town near Toulouse, for those of you who might know. And so we shot this movie in France near Paris, and the story is about a wealthy woman who picks up a male prostitute and asks for more than what he usually sells.
Ask for more than what you. Okay, great. And all right, it's a pretty good summary, pretty good log line. I'm going to go a little deeper into the film in terms of well, what she asks for is companionship, and she asks for and she's recently, or maybe it's been, no, it's been a year, widowed. And it seems like it was the love of her life. She's a relatively young woman, maybe in her 30s. And she is wealthy just by happenstance, beautiful, production set, like staging that palace that you got. And so that makes for that. And she is, maybe able by being wealthy and independent to indulge her depression. And which where some people, perhaps wouldn't be able to, not that they would be mourning any less, but she's sort of stuck in this place in this huge house all alone. And she maybe on one desperate occasion they've never met before goes out and seeks this male prostitute, and he's a young man who happens to perfectly fit her deceased lover's husband's jacket, and like tailored glove. So she picks the right guy, and she really, we don't know. They spend the evening together, but we don't know if sex or not sex. That was not her first interest, and certainly not really here or there in terms of what she's really after, which is to feel her husband, her lover, her partner, the love of her life close to her. So that, and then we have at the end of the film it says for your grandmother.
Yeah.
So, we have this really, and we were talking a little bit earlier, and you'd said how, people had made comments on how I said your film is very theatrical, and you said you've heard that before in terms of how it's more of a play than a screenplay, and it's very sentimental. And coming from a guy who studied romantic and sentimental literature, it's not necessarily, a bad thing that I'm saying, but it's very sentimental in terms of really lingering in the pathos of the emotion that's there. And that's a healthy thing to do. Um, there are potentially degrees to that.
Yeah.
Um, spectrum of that, but certainly healthy to feel your feelings. And this woman is, a year's not that long. Um, Long and short of it, I kind of like am bringing all these elements into it because the first question to play it forward is, where does this story and the passion for telling it come from your own life experience?
Well, so as you said, I dedicated to my grandmother at the end because she was very sick when we made the movie. So we knew she was going to pass away, and I was very, very close to her. It was like another mother. So I was dealing with all that while I was making the movie, and I was supposed to make another movie, and I threw that one out the window. And then I started kind of writing this. So that's kind of where the grief came from. And I also grew up with like a lot of single women, and grief is kind of a pattern in my family. So I think that's where that came from. And then the idea of the prostitute, I would say, is was kind of always a metaphor because I don't think you should watch the movie and think, oh, this is how an actual prostitute is, because it's not like trying to be naturalistic. It's trying to be a different type of tone, which hopefully comes across. So he was more like a metaphor for another type of loneliness than an actual prostitute that you would find in real life.
Could have been real to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. And why not? Why not
Mhm.
have a, interested, compassionate, person who's might be refreshing, not to, um, have to
I
be.
meant more like, the way she picks him up and where he is and how he's dressed and all that sounds, it's a bit more, like out of a fairy tale, which was one of the themes we were going for. Then a lot of people saw it and said, that's not where you would actually find a prostitute, even though in France we have this famous woods called Les Bois de Boulogne, where actually there are prostitutes in the woods.
Oh, that's so
Um,
cool.
yeah,
I mean,
so
I totally none of that was a thing for me. Like I totally
okay.
took that on like as very real. It was it's so theatrical in the sense of the period, it looked almost like a period piece. You don't really know where and when it was shot, maybe in the 70s, maybe it had to be when, cars were available. So the car is really the only thing you have to go on, but everything else, I mean, you got a Victriola, in the bedroom going. So it just is very kind of surreal or magical, and that all worked very well for me.
Oh,
So
thank you.
I'm more interested in the idea of grief, that you said like, and seeing him as a metaphor of like this desire to almost to grieve with the person she lost, right? Like there's that missing piece. It's almost like she can't completely grieve if she's not in touch with the person she lost, and she's feeling she's got to get back in touch with him to lose someone. And that's something very unique and interesting, I think, in this take on grief. And before we switch gears to sort of the meaning and message of what the film is, narratively, it's like you spoke about grief and growing up with grief and
Mhm.
how it was really there. Um, and, you know, I think, I guess the question is, well, how did you come, how did you, how did you not necessarily cope or deal with it, but that's part of the question too. How did it express itself in your life growing up? And then what did you make of it? And then how did you relate to it?
I think um well, as I said, I've seen a lot of women in my family who were alone. So I think it was important to me that the woman in this case was alone. And so what happens sometimes, and I'm sure a lot of the people listening might know this, is like you'll forget kind of about the person who's missing, whatever, and then you'll open a box of something, and there'll be a piece of clothing or something that belongs to them, and it'll be like, oh, it just hits you right back. And actually, there's you're probably familiar with this, but I don't know if you've studied like the method, Lee Strasberg's method. So in the method, the acting method, there's like an exercise you do that's sense memory, where you kind of recreate clothes of or a personal object, which could be a piece of clothing. And I was thinking about that exercise, and I was like, oh, this would be perfect in a movie. So this is where the idea came from when she puts her dead husband's jacket on the male prostitute. It's like it came from this idea of this exercise of like you're trying to recreate something that's gone, which I think is a temptation that we've all had, those of us who are missing someone. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where that came from.
Yeah, I guess to a degree, I mean, how was it in your life growing up with that sense of women being alone? Did it ultimately empower you? Like, okay, well, I can, I see strong female figures, or was there more of a range in how you took all that in?
I mean, I think you can obviously there's a point where you're empowered because you're alone. You have to do like I'm guessing a lot of single mothers, and my next movie also had a single mother. You have to do a lot. You have to be two people in one. So just me watching that growing up, that was a lot, you know. Then obviously you find support where you can, and then um I'm the youngest child. My older sister certainly had to kind of be a bit of a parent at times. But you know, you can be a very happy and functional family, and still you still have someone missing. I had a great family growing up, but I do think um, you deal with it the way you can, but nobody obviously wants to be alone or in that way. So you can say, yes, it was empowering, but on the other hand, there's always a hole in your life. I think that's the way it is, you know.
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know, most of us can relate to having a hole in our hearts,
Hmm.
and it doesn't necessarily um, have to be the loss of a person. There
Oh,
are
yeah.
certainly, right, all these other things that can lead to that. But it is sort of a loss, either way. There's a loss of something, whether it might be innocence or something that we regret or something that we wish, and that we have to overcome that. So using that as a transition to really talk about the film and how we can cope with loss, and what the film says about coping with loss, uh, there is that desire to make connection with the other world that is in your film, and that I think
Hmm.
is a healthy um, gesture
Okay.
in the film.
I'm glad you saw that.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I don't think it's a necessarily complete gesture, but it's an initial.
Hmm.
Um, so how do you see that, and how do you see the journey that is ultimately when we experience any trauma or tragedy, there's that sets up the road to healing. It either sets the road to healing or the road to nowhere in terms of the options and more suffering and pain being nowhere. So, if you agree with that, where where is the woman, and how can we talk about loss, this hole in our heart, in a way that she is on her journey to healing, and how do we what's that road look like in steps?
I don't know if she's on her journey to healing because I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I don't know if but I like that you saw that maybe for her because at the end of the movie, she's like standing in the window, exactly where she started, kind of, I mean, before the movie starts. But it was definitely, I think, a step in her journey. But the thing that we were trying to do, and then I would love to hear if that came across because sometimes it doesn't come across. And I also appreciate that you said that there's different types of losses than just grief. Because actually, I have a friend who saw it and she was like, "Oh, I went through a breakup, and this movie would just like hit me like a ton of bricks." So I was like, "Oh, great! I didn't know that you could get that from that movie, which is great." Um, but so um, yes, I think it was more kind of a spur of a moment need to be with someone and to connect, as you said. And then she reaches out to this person who I think also has a hole in his life from different reasons than grief. We were intentionally a little bit more mysterious about what's going on with him. There was a lot of backstory talk with the actor, and he probably made a bunch of decisions that I don't even know about. I think they have this moment of where they try to connect because I don't know what you think, but I really think that opening up to someone and really connecting with someone is the most terrifying thing in the world. So they try to do that. And I think sometimes it's easier to do that with a stranger because you're just in that moment. You don't have to see them again tomorrow. And it's over, and whatever is exchanged is kind of gone because they leave your lives. And if I was trying to open up to my best friend, or then I have to, I mean, my best friend probably I would do that, but then I have to, the consequences of that vulnerability survive the rest of the relationship, whereas in a stranger, they're just gone. Um, but so I think she kind of get what she wants out of that night. I don't think she goes in thinking this is what's going to happen and I'm going to dress him like this. I think it just kind of happens as it goes along. But someone saw the movie and said something that I really liked to me. They said in that waltz or dance or when they dance together, she's the one who's crying, but he's the one who's vulnerable because although she's crying, she's kind of um, doing this. She's the one who's holding the cards here, and he's vulnerable because he kind of doesn't know what's going on and has this immense grief offloaded on him. So I don't know if that's something that came across, but that was important to me.
Um, well, I didn't necessarily see him as vulnerable at that moment.
Mm,
It seemed like he was consoling her.
mm,
That was my impression of that in that moment. And to step back a couple of paces and look at the narrative, and where a person is in their life, with the grieving process. So there's loss and then there's grieving. So which one kind of sets off the other. Um, and being, you know, from a spiritual perspective, there's this idea, concept that you're always on the path. You can't fall
mm.
off the path. Falling off the path is being on the path, kind of thing. So all
Okay.
these things are lessons too. And so what ends up happening is that you're either engaged in behavior that's causing yourself and others more suffering, or it's alleviating suffering. And oftentimes we don't know which is which until we do it.
Yeah.
So, in the case of the character, her reaching out to connect can be seen as it is healthy. It's more healthy than incubating yourself in a bottle or something else similar to that. So that in itself is a healthy act. Now, what ensues and how far along her journey she may, uh, whether it's an increment or not, is debatable, but not necessarily worthwhile. But to look at her, what's more worthwhile, in my opinion, to look at her and look at this process and look at this life and then reflect it back on ourselves and what do we do? That's worthwhile. That's when, stories are valuable, is
Mm.
when they serve us as directional guides. So based on that, how do you think the story is serving us or can serve us?
Mm, I think, um, oh wow, I don't know. I would just say, hopefully, um, the audience, because some people, this movie is interesting. Some people really don't respond to it, and some people really, really, really respond to it. Like some people have come up to me and said, I cried and blah, blah, and some people are like, nothing, including someone I'm very close to. So I would say the people that it resonates with, I think hopefully they feel it's all right. It's allowed to kind of just really be in your feelings. I really like what you said in the beginning that she has all this money and she can indulge in her depression. I think for anyone really, it's healthy to just no matter how long it's been or whatever. I hate when people say pull yourself together, even whether it's after grief or after like a rough patch that has nothing to do with grief. People are always like pull yourself together, blah, blah. I'm like, yes, okay, but now I really have to feel this, you know? So hopefully it gives audience members the permission to do that. I don't know, what did you think?
Well, I think that's a great point. I mean, I think the follow-up for me to that in what I think is, well, I want people to be happy and healthy, and enjoy their lives and live in peace, sort of thing. So that means within the context of what you said, yeah, yeah, let's feel our emotions and let's be functional as well.
Mhm.
I think that's what people are saying when you say pull yourself together. And when you see somebody being afunctional or dysfunctional, that's like, okay, Um, so can we do both? What do you think? You seem to have an opinion or feeling.
I I really think, and each person is different, right? So I'm really not, say I'm saying it from my observations only. I've seen so many people who have tried to be functional so fast, of
Mm,
like, oh, I have to get back up, I have to da da
mm,
da, and
mm,
including myself. I mean, it happened to me as well. And then they never really dealt with what was there.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think for me personally, from my life and also just people I've observed, it's much healthier to just be like, no, I'm gonna deal with this. I'm
Yeah.
gonna just
Yeah.
live those feelings, whatever way that is. And it can happen at any time because you could have something bad happen to you and then you only need to process it like 2 or 3 years later. Like I've seen people go through that. But when it comes up, I think you have to wrestle with it instead of like wrestling with keeping it inside the box. That's just
Yeah,
my
that's
opinion.
awesome. I think you're right.
Mm,
I think you're right. And that's the beauty of having a dialogue is that, we help each other kind of step around the crime scene and see it holistically and absolutely, we have to allow ourselves a grieving process that takes as long as that takes, and you can't avoid it. You can't run away from it. And at the same time, we have a responsibility to ourselves and others that also needs to be met.
mm.
And both are doable together, don't you think?
How so?
How can you do both?
Yeah. Or do you mean like still showing up in some places and being there for the people that you need to be there, but then having those little pockets where you kind of just
Yeah. Yeah. Making
mm,
time for both, making time for the grief and making space for it, not like rejecting it and not trying to run away from it. And at the same time, making sure you have the time to if you need to be miserable, and then also making sure that you're able to pull your pants on when it's time to put your pants on and take care of, kids, wife, family, yourself. I mean, it's often like I have uh, an old friend went through something tragic. I just heard about it, and I'm hearing he's not showering, right? And so there's a period for that. However, he's showing up to work and remotely. So there's a
yeah.
period for that, and there's a lot of statements that can make, um, and then you're kind of each one of us is responsible for taking care of ourselves.
Yeah.
So
No,
take care. Yeah.
sorry. I'm sorry. I laugh because
Oh,
to me, showing up to work would be harder than not showering. That's the only why. But sometimes, it's everyone has a different thing. It's like I've heard so many people say getting out of bed is that's the
of
classic
course.
when you're not feeling great, which you feel like it's easy because you put a foot down, right? So I wasn't laughing at all. No.
No, no, not at all. No. Yeah.
Um, hmm,
And that's really what it boils down to is how do we help people like say, you can get out of bed when it's time to get out of bed and don't get out of bed when you can afford not to get out of bed,
hmm,
and protecting or encouraging people to grieve and not necessarily fall into deep depression that's dysfunctional. How do you mitigate that? Do you have any thoughts?
I would say, get out of bed, shower, dress glamorously, and go into the woods and find a prostitute. That's my, no, I'm kidding. I mean, unless it is your thing, but I would say the most important thing, and I'm just talking from my opinion. I'm not an expert, but is to be with people. Which I think is what the movie is about. It's like when you're that lonely, she could have just stayed home and like, you know, taken a bath and done nothing and been sad. She did, as you said, she did try to reach out to someone.
That's exactly what
Um,
she did. Yeah, she dressed grandly, went out and to the woods and got a prostitute. I think that's great advice. Um, Oriana, last question is since making this film, Waltz for Three, how has your life been personally changed?
oh my God, this movie was like it took me 4 years to make it. And it was I mean, there were a lot of things because initially she wasn't grieving, she was being cheated on, which I think was a terrible idea looking back. So I had to kind of rewrite it in post, and the actors and the whole team were incredibly gentle and patient with me. So I think in the post production and also finding the composer, Jude, who was incredible and figuring out the music because the music is in that scene is really kind of the husband's presence in a way. We were hoping for that anyway. Um, I had to kind of look at the footage and be like, oh, this movie is about grief, which is funny because that's what we talked about the whole time, but it wasn't obvious to me when I was making it because I think it was so close to me when it was happening. Um, so I think it was really helpful to kind of just put that down and have this um just this little moment where she just fully indulges in her feelings and he also kind of really connects with her. Um, I think it was helpful for me to just do that and then now move on to other other types of films.
Awesome. You know, just to go back to how that might fit in, Spark, what you said, earlier, which, as you said, I think the most terrifying thing is to be totally vulnerable with another person. And I think, you know, I don't at this stage of my life feel
Mhm.
that way. I
Oh,
may have
good.
before. Um, I'm sure I did before. And I think maybe the reason for me, and I don't feel that way, is that I am comfortable being totally vulnerable with myself.
Mm,
So if I can acknowledge, admit whatever it is that I'm doing that's fake or phony or I don't like or this or that, um, then I can get with that and then modify it and see it and explore. Well, why am I doing that? What am I seeking? And where is the approbation that I'm seeking through another person? And one thing I've often found is that uh people don't like it when you don't see them the way they want to see themselves.
mm,
So, I think if we are working on seeing ourselves and having the approbation come from an internal mechanism, it, may get easier with being vulnerable in front of others.
yeah, it's hard. I definitely will still be working on this.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's a life
Mm,
journey. What,
mm.
you have a thought?
Yeah, no, no. I was thinking about no, some of the moments where I was, you have this, it's very rare. I mean, maybe less for you, but this moment could be with a stranger, could be with your best friend, could be with your partner or someone in your family when you're like really connected. It's very intense.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm always worried. My thought was this, I'm always worried about um especially if this is the other thing. I think joy is very easy to share. I think grief is very difficult to share, just in its nature. It's like joy, you could share it with like thousands of people celebrating in the streets with you, and I love that feeling. But grief, it's so personal and it affects someone in such a different way that if you're grieving with someone who's very close to you, they might have a completely different grief process than what you have, you know? So that I then it's like how can you really be open and vulnerable when you don't want to bring the other person down, you know? So like because I know this I heard about this couple um who lost a child. She wanted to get rid of everything that the child had. She just cleared out the room after a while, and that was it. And then he had to keep the things. He had to revisit the places they were. And it's like they still have to be a functional couple. And
Yeah.
it's like, how can you be open and completely vulnerable with your spouse
Yeah.
when you being vulnerable is saying, I want to go back to those places. I want to do this. But then your spouse is going to be destroyed by this. So I feel it's like, it's also hard sometimes when you're trying to move forward, as you said, and I appreciate that we talked about that you're trying to keep going and everything, but you can't just break the other person by being open. So
Mm,
I
mm,
agree with you, but sometimes it's hard.
mm. No,
Yeah.
that's a great point. I love that. And you know, I guess because that brings up an interesting dynamic with like sharing grief and in this example, how the two couple or how the one couple responds to it differently. And there is, this great process of developing our humanity, which forces us to see what we see in the world, not like it, and have to accept it
Hmm.
and internalize that into our own and reconcile it with our own sense of justice, and then be able to have compassion and respect the people that are acting differently from us. So,
Hmm.
and that whether that's our partner and this difference of, grief. It's like in that situation, it's like, well, how do you both honor where you're at and do your best not to trigger one another, and yet you share this common loss, which um which can be a point of coming together. Um, and yeah, to your point, it's not easy. And thank you for exploring the topic. Thank you for um, giving us your time today and taking a look at
Thank
this.
you.
My
Thank you very
pleasure.
much, Kostya. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Oriana Ng, filmmaker, writer, director. The movie's Waltz for Three. Is it available for us to share as a link to the audience?
Not yet, because we're still hoping to get a few more festival selections. Fingers crossed.
Okay. All right.
I will
Well,
let you know when it is.
all right, there you have it. All right, Oriana, thank you. It was a pleasure. Until next time, everybody on Play It Forward. Peace out. We'll see you. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, pleasure.